Have you ever been the smartest person in the room and still secretly felt like life was underpaying you? Have you ever looked at your achievements, your knowledge, your discipline, and wondered why your financial reality doesn't match your true potential? You did everything they told you to do. You mastered your craft. You worked longer than everyone else. You became reliable, respected, skilled, and yet, somehow, people with less talent, less intelligence, and sometimes even less integrity built bigger businesses, created more freedom, and accumulated far greater wealth. Why? This question quietly destroys more high performers than failure ever could, because failure is obvious. But being successful on the surface, while secretly operating far below your true potential, that is a prison almost nobody talks about. And the most dangerous part? Most people trapped inside this prison don't even realize the bars are there. They think their hard work will eventually pay off. They believe excellence alone will set them free. They assume that if they just keep going, keep grinding, keep sacrificing, one day everything will finally align. But for many highly skilled professionals, that day never comes. Not because they lack talent, not because they lack discipline, but because they are trapped by one brutal illusion. They have built expertise, but never built a system. And without a system, talent can become a cage. This is the story of a man who learned that lesson 15 years too late. A man who had respect, but not freedom. A man who had mastery, but not scale. A man who discovered that sometimes, the very thing you are most proud of can become the exact thing holding you back. Stay with me until the end, because this story is not just about one lawyer. It may be about you. In one of the busiest business cities in the country, where deals were signed every hour and fortunes shifted behind polished boardroom doors, there lived a lawyer named Mason. By every traditional measure, Mason was already winning. He had spent more than a decade mastering corporate law. Startups sought his clarity. Executives trusted his judgment. Companies relied on him to protect millions. He wasn't average, he was exceptional. His office shelves were lined with awards. His name appeared in respected publications. His firm had been recognized nationally. Other lawyers admired him. From the outside, Mason looked like the definition of success, but appearances can be dangerously deceptive. Because behind the polished reputation was a man slowly exhausting himself. Every morning started early. Every night ended late. 16-hour workdays became normal. Weekends disappeared. Family time became rare. Rest became a luxury he no longer knew how to accept. And for years, Mason justified it all with one belief: my expertise is my greatest asset. If I become excellent enough, the right clients will always come. So he kept pushing. More contracts, more clients, more responsibility, more hours. And yes, the money came. But not at the level it should have. Not compared to his true value. Not compared to his reputation. Not compared to the firms his less talented peers were quietly building around him. While Mason was selling time, others were building systems. While he was solving every problem personally, others were creating teams, processes, and scalable businesses. And that was the invisible prison. Mason had spent 15 years becoming a powerful professional, but never becoming an architect. He was deeply respected. But respect alone does not create freedom. Because no matter how brilliant you are, if your income depends entirely on your personal output, then your talent has a ceiling. For 15 years, Mason never truly questioned his path. Why would he? The world kept rewarding him. Clients praised him. Colleagues respected him. His income was stable. His reputation was strong. And when society keeps applauding you, it becomes dangerously easy to ignore the quiet voice inside that asks, is this really all you're capable of? That voice stayed buried, until one afternoon changed everything. Mason attended an international business conference filled with nearly 2,000 entrepreneurs, investors, and high-level professionals. The room was electric. Ambition filled the air. Ideas moved fast, power moved faster. Mason walked in confident. After all, he had advised many successful people in rooms like this before. He understood contracts, risk, structure, growth. But what happened next shattered him. After the keynote speech, during a quiet tea break away from the crowd, an older businessman approached him. This man wasn't just wealthy. He had built companies, scaled operations, created systems. He looked at Mason not with admiration but curiosity. Then he asked one question, a simple question, a brutal question. You've helped so many businesses grow, but tell me, have you built one yourself? Mason smiled politely. I have a respected legal practice. The businessman paused. Then came the sentence that changed his life forever. If your expertise is truly that valuable, why are you still trading time for money while others build equity? Silence. Not the silence of confusion. The silence of truth finally arriving. For the first one had no answer. Because deep down, he knew. He had spent years acting like a high-performing specialist, but not a builder. He had optimized skill, but ignored scale. He had protected other people's empires, while never fully building his own. That night in his hotel room, surrounded by awards, status, and the illusion of success, Mason faced the most dangerous realization a high achiever can experience. He was not failing because he lacked ability. He was underperforming because he lacked vision. And sometimes, your greatest breakthrough begins the moment your old identity can no longer defend itself. That night, Mason did something most high achievers avoid at all costs. He stopped defending who he was. For years, his identity had been built on one thing. I am the expert, the top lawyer, the trusted advisor, the man with answers. But now, for the first time, he faced a truth powerful enough to break that identity apart. Being an expert was no longer enough, because expertise had made him valuable, but it had not made him free. And freedom, not prestige, was the missing piece. So Mason made a decision that wounded his ego but saved his future. He became a student again. He stepped out of the spotlight and into rooms where he was no longer the smartest person. He studied business models, leadership systems, strategic marketing, delegation, talent acquisition. He sat in boardrooms not as the legal authority, but as an observer, listening, learning, rebuilding. It was humbling. After years of being praised for mastery, he had to accept how little he understood about scale. But this is where most people fail. They would rather protect their current identity than evolve beyond it. Mason chose differently. He realized that growth often requires the death of the version of you that got you here. And slowly, painfully, powerfully, he stopped asking, how can I work harder? And started asking, how can I build something that works beyond me? That single shift changed everything. Because the moment a professional stops thinking like a performer and starts thinking like an architect, their entire life begins to expand. Months later, Mason met the mentor who would completely rewire the way he saw success. This man had built multiple companies, not practices, not careers, systems. After hearing Mason's story, the mentor said something he would never forget. Right now, you are a brilliant surgeon, insisting on performing every operation yourself. Mason nodded. Then the mentor leaned forward. But if you want wealth, freedom, and scale, you do not need to become a better surgeon. You need to build the hospital. That analogy hit harder than any legal argument Mason had ever heard. For years, Mason believed success meant doing more clients, more hours, more sacrifice, but real expansion required something entirely different: infrastructure. The mentor gave him 3 brutal rules. Stop accepting everything personally. Build systems that attract the right clients consistently. Hire people capable enough to execute without your constant presence. In other words, stop being the machine, build the machine. That was Mason's turning point. He realized that talent creates income, but systems create wealth. Expertise earns respect, but structure multiplies impact. For the first time, Mason understood that his job was no longer to be the bricklayer carrying every stone himself. His role was to become the architect, to design something bigger than his own stamina. Because no matter how gifted you are, if your business cannot function without your constant involvement, you do not own a business. You own a demanding job wearing expensive clothes. Mason returned home with a completely different mindset. For the first time in his career, he understood that his next level would not come from sharpening his legal skills alone. It would come from rebuilding the entire structure around them. And that process was far more painful than he expected. Because transformation sounds inspiring in theory, but in reality it often feels like chaos. For nearly a year, Mason immersed himself in business education. Not casually, not occasionally, obsessively. He studied firm infrastructure, operational design, marketing funnels, leadership psychology, hiring frameworks, and financial systems. By day, he still handled clients. By night, he became a student of scale. And perhaps the hardest part, he had to confront how deeply his old habits were sabotaging his future. For 15 years, he had been conditioned to control everything. Every case, every detail, every decision. Delegation didn't feel natural, it felt dangerous. Trusting others with responsibilities he once carried alone triggered anxiety he had never admitted before. What if they made mistakes? What if quality dropped? What if no one could match his standards? But this was the painful truth. His obsession with control was not protecting excellence, it was suffocating growth. So Mason began the uncomfortable process of letting go. He hired carefully, he trained relentlessly, he built procedures, he documented systems. He created standards that could survive without his constant intervention. And yes, there were failures. Employees misunderstood expectations. Internal conflicts emerged. Clients occasionally experienced friction. Some systems broke under pressure. At times, Mason questioned everything. It would have been easier to go back to working alone, back to certainty, back to exhaustion disguised as control. But he didn't, because now he understood something deeper. Temporary discomfort is the price of permanent expansion. So instead of retreating, he adapted. He refined his leadership, strengthened his processes, improved communication, built smarter. Slowly, the business began depending less on Mason's physical presence and more on the systems he created. And that changed everything. For the first time, revenue no longer rose only when Mason worked longer hours. The machine was beginning to move. Not perfectly, but independently. This was no longer just a respected legal practice. It was becoming an enterprise, and Mason finally learned what most professionals discover too late. Scaling is messy. Leadership is uncomfortable. Building systems is exhausting. But staying trapped as the sole engine of your success cost far more. Years later, Mason walked into the same office building where he had once nearly destroyed himself. But this time, everything felt different. The polished floors were the same. The conference rooms were the same. The city outside still moved with the same relentless speed. But Mason was no longer the same man. There was a time when this office represented pressure. A place where every ringing phone meant another demand, another problem, another fire only he could extinguish. Back then, his business depended almost entirely on one thing: him, his mind, his time, his stamina, his sacrifice. If Mason stopped, everything slowed down. If Mason burned out, everything suffered. If Mason disappeared, revenue disappeared with him. That is not freedom. That is dependency disguised as success. But now, for the first time in over 15 years, Mason had built something different. His firm no longer operated like a survival machine fueled by personal exhaustion. It operated like a structured enterprise, a real business, a business with systems, a business with leadership, a business with standards, a business with momentum. His team could handle operations. His processes created consistency. His marketing created opportunity. His structure created scale. And perhaps the strangest feeling of all, for the first time in his life, Mason realized he could step away, and everything would not collapse. That realization hit him harder than his first major legal victory ever had. Because what he had truly built was not just more income. He had built breathing room. He had built leverage. He had built freedom. For years, Mason believed wealth would come from doing more. More effort, more sacrifice, more excellence. But now he understood, wealth was never just about effort. Wealth is built when effort becomes architecture. That single realization changed the way he saw every ambitious professional around him. He began noticing something painful. So many brilliant people were trapped exactly where he used to be. Doctors, consultants, designers, coaches, lawyers, experts, highly skilled, highly respected, highly exhausted. People who had spent years becoming extraordinary at what they do, but had never learned how to detach their value from their direct labor. And because of that, their talent became their trap. This is one of the cruelest paradoxes in modern success. The better you become, the more people need you. And if you do not build systems in time, your own excellence can quietly imprison you. You become too important to step away, but never truly free enough to grow. Mason finally understood that freedom does not come from being indispensable. Freedom comes from building something that does not break without you. That is an entirely different game. One evening, sitting calmly in his office before sunset, something his younger self would have thought impossible, Mason opened his financial reports, not out of fear, not out of desperation, but reflection. And as he looked at the numbers, he realized something profound. The biggest transformation was not financial, it was psychological. For years, he had operated like a craftsman. Now he thought like an architect. A craftsman perfects the work. An architect designs the system that allows great work to scale. That identity shift changed everything. Because once you stop asking, how can I personally do more, and start asking, how can this become bigger than me, you stop building income and start building legacy. This is the brutal truth most hardworking people avoid. You can spend your entire life improving your skill and still remain trapped. Not because skill is unimportant, but because skill alone does not multiply. Without structure, talent has limits. Without systems, expertise has ceilings. Without leverage, hard work eventually becomes diminishing returns. This is why some of the smartest people in the world stay financially stagnant, while others with equal, or even lower, technical ability build extraordinary wealth. Because wealth rarely belongs only to the most talented. It belongs to those who learn how to expand talent beyond themselves. Mason's life changed the moment he realized he was never meant to simply be the engine. He was meant to build the machine. And now the question becomes personal. What about you? Are you still solving every problem yourself? Still believing your hard work alone will eventually set you free? Still wearing exhaustion like a badge of honor? Still confusing being needed with actually being powerful? Or are you finally ready to build something greater? Because here is the truth. If your business, career, or income cannot function without your constant involvement, then you may be successful, but you are not scalable. And if you are not scalable, you are one crisis, one burnout, or one limitation away from hitting your ceiling. So yes, master your craft, become elite, become undeniable, but never make the mistake Mason made for 15 years. Do not stop at mastery. Learn systems, learn leadership, learn leverage, learn how to multiply your value through people, process, and structure. Because your ultimate goal should not be to become the best worker in the room. Your goal should be to become the builder of something that outlives your direct effort. This is how true freedom is created. This is how wealth begins to match potential. This is how respected professionals become powerful architects. So start now. Audit your life. Where are you still the bottleneck? Where are you still over-controlling? Where are you still trading irreplaceable time for replaceable output? Then begin, slowly if necessary, messily if required. But begin, because the greatest tragedy is not failure. The greatest tragedy is spending your entire life incredibly capable, while remaining structurally small. The world does not simply reward hard work. It rewards those who learn how to build beyond themselves. So build, not just a career, not just income, not just reputation. Build a system. Build a machine. Build a life where your brilliance no longer survives only through your effort, but through the empire your effort was wise enough to create. And when that day comes, you will finally understand, success is impressive, but freedom is the real victory.